We're going to go over the second part of From Modern to Postmodern. We looked at American art in the last lecture and how New York City becomes the center of the art world after World War II with the abstract expressionists, artists like Mark Rothko and Jackson Pollock. And we saw how the baby boomers in the 1960s and 1970s really changed art in dramatic ways in terms of the conceptual art and performance art and the video art that they were doing. Today, we're going to start in the 1980s and see the major developments that have happened in art since around the late 70s, early 80s, and we'll kind of see where various forms of art might exist today. Oops. This one. Okay. Art since the 80s, postmodern world. So the term postmodernism was first used to describe the architecture of the Georges Pompidou National Center of Art and Culture, designed by Renzo Piano and Richard Rogers in Paris in 1977. Up until then, a style of architecture that we saw in modern art, I talked about at the end of modern art from 1800 to 1945, the kind of steel and glass rectilinear, also known as cigar box style architecture, had really kind of dominated the architectural scene. And then this new art center has a kind of new way of thinking about art with scaffolding and pipes and tubes and funnels and color-coded according to their functions, like a building turned inside out, or the architects calling it a science fiction Jules Verne spaceship that can't fly. So in postmodernism, in architecture, we see architecture is more interested in what's going on in Las Vegas than it was in the modernist styles that were influenced, say, by the Bauhaus. Postmodern art, we've seen a bit of it throughout the class. Sherry Levine in 1991 recreates Marcel Duchamp's urinal. So a kind of postmodern ultimate statement here. The fountain is a valuable, even sacred object, suggesting that the original fountain is now firmly enshrined in all contemporary artists' minds. And certainly in this class, I have mentioned it quite a bit. So the appropriation, we have studied appropriation art. We're going to see this is kind of really where it comes from, is from postmodernism. So to be postmodern is to live in a state of your world is primarily from media. It used to be primarily from radio, TV, and newspapers. Now it's primarily from the internet. Most of what you know and how you interact with the world is in media. So we are products of media more so than real life, we could say. Also, some of the conditions of being postmodern includes a kind of skepticism towards the world as well. Postmodern art will find playful qualities, eccentric qualities, multiple viewpoints, meanings, and references rather than singular meanings, inspired by our pop artists and industrial materials like we saw in minimalism with Donald Judd, language as art, and inviting narratives of the oppressed and institutional critique. So we have seen this image before when we studied in our discussion on appropriation art, Yasumasa Morimura's portrait that he has taken a photographic portrait that he has created of the original painting done by Edouard Manet. And this painting of a street-walking prostitute looking at us in a not a particularly friendly manner. It seems as if Yasumasa has appropriated that. The attendant with the flowers he has recreated with himself in that role. And everything you're looking at is a photographic collage. Barbara Kruger, who we also have seen several times in the class. So Barbara she did her untitled still photographs. And then here, she had worked in advertising. She's taking the typefaces and kind of look of advertising and bringing it into fine art. She's appropriating images from other photographers. Here, she's making color lithographs in 1997. And we see Marilyn Monroe in one image. We see Andy Warhol in another. And the first thing we read is not cruel enough, not stupid enough. So around these images, say for Andy Warhol, not beautiful enough, not man enough, not real enough, not pathetic enough. She's talking about her skepticism in her being able to make it in the art world. Marilyn Monroe, around the border again, not good enough, not skinny enough, not nothing enough, not ironic enough. So these images are made by a woman, kind of feminist statements about her feelings of her place in the art world. The irony is that they ultimately become kind of treasured in the art world from this perspective that she's enlightening us on. Perhaps her most important work that we're seeing scattered around the internet today is the poster "Your Body is a Battleground," where she takes a photograph, solarizes one half of it, and we get the typeface Futura with the red line rules underneath that were from the Bauhaus and the 1930s in new typography. And we're seeing this statement to women about their body and that who owns their body. Do you own your body, or does the state own your body? Well, the state definitely is saying what women can and can't do with their body. The state is trying to say what children can do and not do with their body. There are a number of rules that it seems like you're not always in control of your body. And certainly with the overturning of Roe versus Wade, certainly in states, women do not have choices about their body. Here's Cindy Sherman again, and her photographs, her untitled's that she does, she's always starring in them, wearing makeup, wearing clothes, putting backgrounds in, and she is playing characters in Americana here. So she is presenting these in traditional frames, and we see these kind of modern American queens oozing privilege and entitlement, kind of caricatures of high society divas who are staring coldly out at the viewer with digitally inserted environments and kind of an over-the-top vulgarity in them, which, again, make them pretty great. From sculptors, we see repurposing and, again, assemblage type sculptures. This is Tom Friedman. This is his Big Bang made out of toothpicks. So he's repurposing what the toothpicks would have been intentionally used for, and they're becoming something else. Here is Fred Wilson's Mining the Museum from 1992. Fred Wilson is a black artist who is invited to curate a show out of the permanent collection. And what he did is he went into the silver collection that they had, all the beautiful silversmithing, but rather than just simply looking at these beautiful objects made by very talented artisans, he also shows the slave shackles that would have been used on the people who were mining the silver, reminding us in totality of the cost and how these beautiful objects were made. Painting comes back from the 1930s and 40s and 50s, where really the figurative image was not in vogue. That was thought to be more of commercial or illustrative images. But we're starting to see paint coming back from artists like Anselm Kiefer, who is painting in thick paint. He's adding straw and other debris in his large-scale paintings. And his paintings really have a stark, empty, kind of nihilist quality to them. From Jean-Michel Basquiat, we get a street artist, a black street artist in New York City, who is painting quickly. He is taking the kind of tagging that he is doing from the street, bringing it into art. He is working very symbolically, very roughly, like the German expressionists before him. And he is writing, he is feeling, and he is not afraid to be rough and crude within his work. There's a great collection of Basquiat at the Broad Museum. I highly recommend him. Julian Schnabel is another artist from the 80s and the art boom, along with Basquiat. He started taking broken plates and then gluing broken plates to pieces of wood and then painting on top of them in that rough, thickly painted way. That is that kind of neo-expressionist signal that I think probably Anselm Kiefer is probably responsible for making popular. From Lucian Freud, perhaps the greatest portrait artist of the last part of the 20th century. Lucian Freud is a nephew of Sigmund Freud, is doing these really penetrating portraits of people, kind of finding psychological states in them. And he's working the paint until it no longer has any bright color to it. It's sandy, it's gritty, and he's a master with the paint. Also in postmodernism, we get into other mediums besides painting that were opened up in artists in the 60s and 70s. And also we get concerned with art being political. Issues with women, issues with the lesbian and gay community, ultimately the trans community. And we are seeing also how people are speaking who are otherwise marginalized in society. Jenny Holzer is an artist who's using LED lights and words, and her artwork is talking to us. Here she does a temporary piece on the casino Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas. And rather than a sign that would normally be talking about what slot machines or what car maybe you could win if you play certain games, we see this statement, "Protect me from what I want," which is really kind of unusual in the context of the space that it's in. And also because it's not advertising anything. What is it? Well, it's a work of art by an artist. Catherine Opie, a photographer who teaches at UCLA, was on the board of MoCA. She is showing us work that in Having and Being from 1991, she's showing portraits with women with mustaches, and she is asking about outward appearances and how those outward appearances affect how we see people. And also, why can't women have facial hair if they can grow it? Is that really something they can't have, or is that just society being uptight? We see a very similar kind of project in Anna Mendietta's untitled Facial Hair Transplants, where she takes the facial hair of her husband and wears it in these photos. I think Catherine Opie's probably best work is her early work in 1993, when she has been documenting the lesbian BDSM society that she lives in, and a society that I would know nothing about, a small society. And we see her wearing garb from this kind of fetish society. And she's also carved into her body images. We see her on the left with an image of a woman holding a woman's hand and an idealized house with a smokestack and the sun coming out from a cloud. On the right, we see what must have been a very painful project to do, where she has inserted spikes inside of her arms. Her head is inside of some sort of bondage equipment, and she is once again carved on her body. Pretty powerful stuff. Kara Walker is an artist who works in cutout paper. She also is an illustrator, really fine illustrator too. Often in her installations, we will find video being part or projected on these images of antebellum South, where we are seeing plantation life, but a plantation life where it appears as if black women have more power and are able to humiliate the slave masters. Felix Gonzalez Torres makes one of my favorite artworks, artwork you can eat. This was his portrait of Ross, untitled. This was during the AIDS epidemic, and his lover Ross was dying of AIDS. Every morning he would weigh Ross as he was wasting away and put the same weight of candy in the corner of the gallery in red, white, and blue shiny wrappers, and inviting you to eat the candy, kind of like how when you go to Catholic Mass, you drink the wine and you eat the wafer, which is the body and the blood of Christ. So this looks like a minimalist sculpture, but is actually interactive. And art you get to eat, which is great. Here, the Guerrilla Girls have appropriated a billboard, and after seeing a show at the Met Museum, they discovered that 5% of the artists in the modern section are women, but 85% of the nudes are female. So they ask this provocative question with a gorilla mask on Ang's odalisque: do women have to be naked to get into the Met Museum? And this billboard was facing the Met Museum, really asking, humiliating, shaming them into changing their practices. The Guerrilla Girls work in secret, often in public, wearing gorilla masks. In new media, digital media, we get new art using the internet. This is Listening Post by Mark Hansen and Ben Rubin. They, like Jenny Holzer, are using words and creating a artwork made from the internet, from screens, and from chat rooms.
I am.
So as the chat rooms are speaking, the artwork is speaking around the world.
I'm fine.
So this was in the Whitney Museum in New York City when I first saw it.
I'm off. I am 18M. I am. I'm nice. I'm 26. I am hot.
So here we're listening to digitally made
I
voices.
am 14.
We're seeing the LED screens run by in real time through these chat rooms, and we are listening into all of these conversations at once. Another important digital video artwork is from Bill Viola, his Five Angels of the Millennium, where he's using really high resolution video and then having people diving into water and then slowly showing them coming out of the water, almost as if they're being born. So that was Bill Viola. So not only do we have internet art and digital art that you can see on the computer, and the best website that I talked about in an earlier lecture on film and the internet is rhizome.org. I think this is the best website to find fine art, highly conceptual, postmodern art, really strong researched academic art. Rhizome.org is the site to do that. Street art also became very popular in postmodern art. Artists following in the footsteps of the landscape artists who were getting out of the gallery and working out in space, like on the Spiral Jetty. artists like Banksy doing stencils, other artists doing strange installations and paintings and things like that. The streets in some ways are more interesting than what's happening inside the museums and galleries. And then another one of the really newer movements, although I guess it's 20 years old now, is social practices in art, where this title kind of came out of a number of performative and conceptual practices and tactical media that were using art and art spaces as a way to involve the audience. This is an example here from Finishing School of the Patriot Library from 2003. They turned a gallery in Oakland into a working library that had a librarian working in it. And then also, they had books on the shelves that had been made to be seen as dangerous by Homeland Security and the Patriot Act. So certain books after 9/11 and the Patriot Act, if you check them out of libraries, and the library obviously had curated them into their collections, but the federal government decided that if people checked these books out, you were compelled, if you were a librarian, to put the people who checked these books out onto a federal list to watch them. And probably what the government is doing here is overstepping its bounds on our freedom from intrusion from the government. And the last thing I want to show here is culture jamming. I think this is another practice of the postmodern. The yes men from CalArts were very good at this. They're artists who use politics to jam into media that they think is being used irresponsibly, or they try to alter the path in which that media operates. So what they would do is they would create fake websites for like the World Trade Organization. And then when in the early internet, when people weren't so savvy about being pranked, the yes men would end up on television shows as representatives from businesses and from the World Trade Organization, and they made a really great film. And I have a video here how they apologize as a representative of Dow Chemicals for a chemical spill. Okay, I'd like you to take an assessment of Postmodern 2. Let me know what you think, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.